What is up YouTube, and welcome back to the channel. Today I bring you our first versus video of 2021 right here in the back of Accelerated headquarters. I have to my right the 2021 Volkswagen Atlas. It's fully refreshed against the 2021 Subaru Ascent. Let's go. In this ultra competitive third row SUV market, we've got a ton of vehicles to compete against. So I brought two vehicles today that aren't really at the top of their game. Well, guess what? The Kia Telluride exists, the Hyundai Palisade, there's also the Pilot and the Highlander. There's tons out there to compete against these two. So why these two specifically? One, because we got this Ascent, and it keeps screwing me up because I keep thinking Accent. Why did they pick this name? Oh, I hate this name. But the Atlas, on the other hand, is all fully refreshed. So it was our first car we ever did in our studio here, so we're pretty proud of having this Atlas to compete against this Ascent. Now there's so much to talk about, so stick it out and stick with me, and let's get into it. Now the Ascent is marketed as an 8-passenger vehicle. Now this is a 7-passenger version, and the Atlas only comes in a 7, it doesn't come in an 8. Now there's some really interesting things inside the vehicle on seating configurations that I really want to show you guys. But on the outside here, on the front, there's really some drastic differences. Like on the front of this Ascent, and Subaru's never been one to really pop when it comes to design, and it's no different with this Ascent. It's just really hard to love the front end. It's just really reliable, and that's probably the best way I can term this thing. The front end just gives me like this Ford Taurus vibe for some weird reason. But it does have LEDs in the front, in the headlights and the fog lights. And on the Touareg, aka Atlas, it does have LEDs in the headlights, but it has no fog lights because the fog lights are built into the LEDs. Now, the other piece about it is that the Subaru actually has something called eyesight, which is basically eyes on the road. So it detects any sort of obstruction. So whether it be a vehicle, a person, keeping your lane, all the good stuff is all done through the eyesight. Now, ironically, when you get the eyesight, you actually get really, really small visors inside. I wanted to mention you guys that on the last video, but I just couldn't remember. And on the Atlas here, all the built-ins are done in the Volkswagen emblem. So all the sensors are built inside that, as opposed to on the windshield. Now, the only thing that's on the windshield is the lane assist that's on the top here. Otherwise, everything's built into the Volkswagen logo. Before you guys blow up the comments on why these cars don't compare against each other, you're right. This is actually a 6-cylinder, a 3.6 liter V6 that's in this Atlas, and this has a Boxer 4-cylinder, a 2.4 liter, but this one makes a little bit more torque. And the other reason you guys would blow up our comments is because you absolutely hate the transmission in this Ascent, and you actually hate the history of Volkswagen because how they destroyed the planet. Yes, we will talk about the elephant in the room, and the elephant is that when Subaru launched 77,000 of these things in 2019, they recalled them all because of the CVT transmission. But in 2021, they have fixed those issues. There is no transmission issues left with the Subaru. Now, obviously, a CVT drives differently than a conventional 8-speed, which is what this 3.6 liter Atlas has. CVT is in a league of its own. You either hate it or you love it. Now visually, this is kind of cheating because this Atlas has the R line, so it does give it a nicer front end and obviously bigger wheels. But if we sort of go under the motor here to show you, this does have, as I mentioned, the 3.6 liter V6 that makes 276 horsepower and 265 foot-pounds of torque. Now if you compare that to the Subaru here, this 4-cylinder Boxer motor without, I can't believe they have a prop rod. Come on, Subaru. Come on, Subaru. Makes 238 horsepower and 258 foot-pounds of torque out of this 4-cylinder. Now the key is both of these tow 5,000 pounds, but I would really like to know if you load the Subaru up and you're towing 5,000 pounds, over the long haul, how's that gonna do? And that is probably the little sticky point with what people actually think about this Ascent. Because if you're loaded up with people and you're towing over a 4 or 5 year period, how's this motor gonna handle versus a V6? And that's probably one of the drawbacks with why people actually don't buy the Ascent and they buy the Atlas, because that's what I'd be thinking about. But on the other hand, this is skinnier, shorter, almost $6,000 cheaper. So what do you get besides just the engine? Now look at the side of this thing. As I mentioned, this just looks like a really big station wagon, and they've got these massive, massive crossbars on the top. I mean, they're solid and huge. They also have comfort access. When you walk up, it unlocks the door, but it's only in the front and not in the back. Annoying. I love it when it's on all four doors, because obviously, you know, you want to have your keys in your pocket, you walk up to it, you open the door, and you can get in the back. But visually, what do you guys think about the side of this car? Do you guys like it? Let me know in the comments below. Now on the side of the Atlas here, we do have this R line. So you do get the bigger wheels, you get some extra trim here, the R badging, this, that, and the rest. But there's also some interesting pieces here. One is you do have this 360 camera here that is not available in the Ascent. You can only get a 180-degree front camera in the Ascent, but on the Atlas you get a full 360. And on the side, on all four doors, you do have comfort access. So you put your hand in, you pull it out and unlock the door. Now, visually, there's probably not much I can tell you, because it's all about your eyes and what you see. Because on the outside of this thing, in my opinion, I just like the cleaner lines of how the Atlas looks. So on the back of the Atlas, it continues with the same clean lines you have on the side and the front. Like, look how they put Atlas, nice and clean. Look how you pop the trunk. Yeah, not the conventional Volkswagen way. Gotcha, it's done here. And this is why I want to show you guys the stuff we're going to use. All this other stuff is fluff, because when people buy these cars or SUVs, they think about how they're going to use them. And that's why you watch this review, because you've probably watched 15 reviews out there on Atlases, on Ascents, but how to use them on a daily. And that's what we're going to show you today. So let's talk about space. This is a fundamental difference, because in the back or third row of the Atlas, you actually have two seats. If you notice, there's two tethers in the back there. That means there's two seats in the back or third row of this Atlas. Let's go take a look at the Subaru now. In the Subaru, it's a totally different concept. They want to put 3 people in the back of this third row. If you notice, 1, 2, 3. There are 3 tethers back here for 3 seats. Now, if I want to pull the seats up to show you, because that's how they're going to try to tell you can fit more people back here, but this is 2 inches skinnier than the Atlas, which means 3 people back here versus 2 people back there. What are you looking for? So what are you looking for in an SUV? If you're looking for space in the third row, you know the answer. So if you try to measure how much space you have from the back of the third row until the sill, you have 18.5 inches in the Subaru. And on the Atlas, you have 24 inches. That is a drastic difference. If you're trying to put stuff behind the third row, there's definitely a lot more room in the back of the Atlas. And that is where the length difference matters, because the Atlas is actually 3.5 inches longer than the Subaru. Now it's also 2 inches wider, but in the back here, you notice you actually have some width for the people sitting in the third row. But there's something interesting. These back seats only have one position, whereas in the Subaru, you have about 8 different incremental tilt positions in the third row. How easy is it to put these third row up and down? Now, the Subaru is kind of weird, to be honest. They've got 2 different little string pull things here. And check this out. When I have it down, I hold this little thing and I pull up, and this initial part is very heavy. So I got to pull it back, and then it stops right there. And for me to move it more, to tilt it, I have to pull this guy, and then it tilts down. Now, yes, you do have all those different sort of tilt modes you have there, but just that is just a little bit hard. Now, Subaru does have something interesting. They actually do also hide this tonneau cover just like the Atlas does, but this one seems to have a little bit more room back here, and it's a little bit more utility-like as opposed to the Atlas. So in the Atlas now, the initial pull is not that heavy. I'm just pulling it here. It's definitely lighter than the Subaru. When I get to this point, well, guess what? It locks. It doesn't get any more. That's all I can do with it. And if I want to pull it down, I just pull this handle up. Typical Audi Volkswagen product. You push down and it closes. But underneath here, as I mentioned, you'll see it's not as utility. There isn't a plastic cover. It hides it, but that's about it. There's not much space you can use underneath here. The Subaru does a better job with that. So how about using the key fobs to pop the trunks? Push the button at the same time. Winner. But here's where the Atlas loses. When I try to close them both and I hit them, guess who wins? I lied, the Atlas won. But there's something that the Subaru does a little bit better, and that is this. When you want to lock the doors on the Subaru before walking away from it, you actually have a lock button. And unfortunately, the Atlas does not. But what the Atlas does have is fake exhaust, and the Subaru has real ones. Who's the winner? All right, so I'm in the back of the 2021 Subaru Ascent, and first and foremost, this vehicle has 19 cup holders. That is 4 more cup holders than the Atlas. 19 cup holders. Just look at this back door. There's 3 cup holders in this back door. But who cares about that? We care about the seats and how to get in and out of them. Now, this does have somewhat of a flat floor on the center, but look how these seats fold flat. Now, if I wanted to pull it, it gives me a choice. I pull this handle down and then it slides forward. Now, when it slides forward, I can push the second handle and it folds, but it doesn't fold completely flat. And that's something the Atlas does better. It folds completely flat. The other thing that the Atlas does better is the back seat here. When I want to move it backwards and forwards, I actually don't have to take out the baby seat. And that's probably one of the problems with most of these SUVs is that, yes, you can put a baby seat in the back, but you actually take the baby seat off when you want to get to the back. That is when you get non-captain's chairs. Now, the Subaru does have class-leading second row space, but it's the third row that people care about. That's why they buy a third row SUV. So let's jump in the third row and take a look. Now, I'm gonna move this forward just so you guys can see. So I'm gonna keep this seat with lots of space. So actually, I'm gonna move this all the way back, okay? So let's see how much space we have behind me all the way back. Now, as I mentioned, this is a 3-seater third row. Now, let me move this all the way up. And I don't know how I would put a person next to me. I'm a pretty small dude, and 3 small dudes in the back, a little bit tight. How about my legroom? I'm basically just about touching. It's not totally uncomfortable, but it's not the biggest space. Now, if we go off our checklist and see how much is here, well, I have 2 cup holders here, and I have 3 cup holders there. That's cool. 2 here, 3 there. I also have 2 USBs here. And something Subaru does that's kind of unique is on their USBs, they actually show you the amperage. 2.1, and that's important because a lot of cars only have 1 amps in terms of plugins, and these ones have 2.1 amperage worth of power. Now, this is a 7-passenger Ascent, which means 3 in the third row, buckets or captain's chairs in the second, and then obviously, 2 seats in the front. But you can also get this in an 8-seater. So think about that. It would be pretty tight in here. Now, the fact they offer it might give you that checkbox, or maybe you just have 4 kids and they all kind of want to sit in their own seats, so maybe this is what you'd opt for. But really, it all depends on the kids. This is all about the kids and the dogs, obviously. All right, so I'm in the back of the 2021 Atlas now, and I don't want to cheat like some others and push this chair all the way forward to show you there's a lot of legroom here, but there is. Again, there's no comparison in terms of complaining about how much room there is in the second, because it's all about the third. So with that said, there's actually a step up. This is a flat section to get to the third row, but in the Subaru, it actually has a hump. It's kind of a flat floor in the back of this Atlas. But before I jump to the back, I want to talk about a few things. USB-Cs. 2 USB-Cs in the Atlas. It also has a full-out plug that you can plug in like some other domestic product. And, well, this is a Volkswagen. Now, the other cool part about it is you can actually shut, from the front, you can shut off these buttons. So in the back, the kids can hit this button and it actually won't do anything. It's all set in the front. Now in the Subaru, as you saw, it does actually tilt and the whole thing slides forward. But in the Atlas, again, you put your car seat there, it doesn't go forward, and this is how you get in. It actually doesn't slide, it just pivots forward and back. So I actually prefer the way these are done. It's only a 1-step process, and there's not 2 steps. There's not pull, it's just a 1-step process. As far as quality goes in the seats of the second row, the Subaru is kind of interesting. When I put this up, it sort of locks the position you have, which I prefer more than just having this little slider here that raises the height of this armrest. But the one thing the Subaru lacks is the lighting on the inside. The Subaru basically has halogen lights on all their ambient lighting, but in this one, it's all LED, and that just gives them that like modern new feel, this refreshed feel. Well, this is a refresh version. It does have some new interior pieces here in the door panel, but again, it's all about the third row. Let's jump on back. So now I'm in the third row, and I can tell you when I'm sitting inside, it's definitely a lot wider. Well, obviously, because there's only 2 seats instead of 3. But how about legroom? They're almost exactly the same, and that might be because these rails are a little bit longer. It definitely feels more airy and more cabin here than it does in the Subaru. It is bigger, there's no doubt. But there's no USBs back here, which is kind of disappointing. There is a plug. There is a cigarette lighter plug in the back, but there's no USBs. And yeah, there's cup holders, but they're small. The Subaru wins in that category. All right, so I'm in the front of the Ascent, and first things first, I noticed there is a CD player. If you guys know what that is, it's basically something that's silver that holds tracks, and you put it in here and it plays. Yes, this has a CD player. Jokes aside, the steering wheel is pretty much exactly the same as the other two Subarus we reviewed. Same steering wheel, but I do like this white accent they have on the dash that flows through it. It's kind of a nice like touch. It's very small. Like fundamentally, this thing is very practical. And then they put this nice little leather piece there to maybe soften it up a little bit. As far as the seats go and visibility, it's great. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more on the drive. But this thing has 3-zone climate control. Again, it's got 2 USBs in the front, and it does have a 3.5 millimeter jack you can plug in for your audio. It also does have, no, it doesn't have a digital dash, and no, it doesn't have wireless charging. We need wireless charging. Wireless charging is key, Subaru. You take this and you put it here and it charges. We need wireless charging. And yes, the Atlas has wireless charging. And yes, the Atlas does have a digital dash, which I'll get to in a minute. But the Subaru has a few other cool little features. And that is basically, it says first, second, and third row. It tells you who has and doesn't have their seatbelt on. And it'll actually ding long enough to annoy you to force the kids to put the seatbelt on. Now, it doesn't have anything like some of the other brands does, where you can press a button and it mutes the speakers in the car, or something you hit and you can talk and it amplifies your voice to the third row. It doesn't have any of that fun stuff, but it does have all the practical stuff you'd expect out of a Subaru. The most important thing is X mode. And I don't know if you guys watched my Cross Trek review. What it does is essentially it locks the front wheels so they rotate at the same time, because Subaru is all about the all-wheel symmetrical. That's how they push it, right? So Subaru has listened to their customers, because they've added a few things. They've added a master light switch. You see, in the 2019, if you wanted to shut off the lights completely, you couldn't. You actually had no master light switch, and there is now one on the front. There's also a way you can set the memory of the rear trunk. Now, the rear trunk actually opens up a little bit more in the Atlas, but in the Atlas, you have to go outside and press the button to hold the height. In this one, it's simply just a button. So they've added that. But then they have weird things like, you know, it's a CVT and you have paddle shifters. You don't really need to have paddle shifters on a CVT because these are simulated shift points. That's not a real, true manual gearbox. There's no physical gears. It's a CVT. But they did add one thing that screams minivan, and check this out. Nothing screams minivan like a rear passenger mirror. That is minivan. Now, both these vehicles have a pretty small screen at an 8-inch size. If it were me, I'd want a 12-inch screen, because nobody in the third row can actually see this screen. It's way too small. And there's no way that anybody in the back can see what radio station you're playing or what song is next. Now, they can tell what temperature they have because there is a display back here, but for radio, there's no way to find out. Make it bigger on both sides, not just here. And I go pretty in depth in the Cross Trek or Cross Sport. I keep getting confused with them. But basically the one I did reviewed last, I went pretty in depth in that Subaru on this screen. All right, so I'm in the 2021 Atlas now, and yes, this just feels so much bigger. Now, this is the refresh version, so they've added a few minor pieces, but the steering wheel is just a lot more sporty, and it just brings me to that GTI excitement, and it just screams sporty. Now, yes, there's a lot more plastic in here. Now, Subaru tightens that up. There's just less plastic in the Subaru and more plastic in here, but this is just wider and bigger and more on-road presence. I haven't even driven it yet, but I can tell you that's the case. Now, the Volkswagen is just cleaner. There's just less pieces for me to look at. It's just a lot more linear. This digital dash is really, really clean. I go into some of that in some of the other Volkswagen products I've tested, but look at this armrest. It is huge. They do have a USB in here and 2 USBs up front, so that's 3 USB-Cs. So visually, all the buttons are really small. So like, it does have 4 different driving modes, and they're small. The parking brake is small. The HVAC controls are small. The volume controls, the steering wheel controls, the door and window controls are all small, compared to even the Telluride had huge buttons. And if I compared that to the Ascent, it's just lots of different types of buttons, but here it's consistent. It's just small little circular knobs and small buttons. But it has wireless charging. It's got wireless charging. No heads-up display, but it's got wireless charging. There's a feature that the Atlas has and the Subaru does not, and that is auto stop start. In the Atlas, you have to hit the auto stop start to deactivate it. The Subaru doesn't have one. So if you hate to stop and start, well, the Subaru's got the win on that one. But again, I wish that this was bigger than an 8-inch center screen. Now this does have gesture controls and a few other cool features on the system. But again, I feel like it should be a 12-inch screen because this is such a big, huge dash. And even when I look back here, this is definitely a bigger vehicle. There's no doubt that the Subaru feels smaller, feels like I have better visibility. This just sits really high, has huge shoulder lines. This hood just feels really high and tall, whereas the Subaru feels lower and definitely more car-like. This also does have 3-zone climate control, except if you want to control the rear, you actually have to use the digital screen to do that. There's no physical button, whereas in the Subaru, you do have a physical button for the kids in the back. Now let's get both these cars on the road and see how they drive. All right, so I'm in the 2021 Atlas now, and I'm gonna take this for a drive, and it's because I've had the Subaru for about a week. I'm pretty familiar with how that drives, but the Atlas I just got about 20 minutes ago. Now it does have a tilt and telescopic steering wheel, which is exactly the same as the Subaru. Now the Subaru steering is pretty much as light as this. Yeah, I would say that they're very, very comparable in terms of lightness. The Subaru though has this weird sort of lane keeping system that really throws you off when you're going faster speeds. It just feels really wobbly around the street. And obviously the CVT transmission is something to get used to. They both have heated steering wheel, but I really want to talk about visibility because visibility is key. Now, I'm definitely sitting, and I know that I'm sitting higher in this. I do definitely feel higher. I feel like in this, it's just a really big box, if that makes any sense. It's just more targeted to sort of the Yukon driver, as opposed to Subaru is really just dedicated to the outdoor driver. Now, in terms of performance, acceleration, I feel that this is as zippy as the Subaru so far. The Subaru seems to have a bit softer suspension. This one feels definitely a little bit more German. It's just a little bit harder. So the Subaru just really needs to have a progressive steering. I feel like the faster it gets, it doesn't feel as safe. It just feels like the steering is just a little bit too direct the faster you go. It really needs to have a progressive steering, so the faster you go, the harder it is to turn the steering wheel. Well, the Subaru doesn't really work that way. At any speed, it feels very light. So if you're going on the highway and you're doing, say, whatever, 100 kilometers an hour or 70 miles or whatever number you decide to drive at highway speeds, well, the Subaru is going to feel really light and just not as safe. The Atlas just has a lot less visual distractions in the cabin. The speedometer is really clean. The buttons, as I mentioned, are really small. Like these HVAC temperature gauges are just so tiny. They're so small that you actually have to sort of look there to see what it is. It's just not big enough. The Subarus probably do a better job in terms of size, but the Subaru has more distractions. There's more buttons. There's more offset buttons to throw your visual focus off, if that makes any sense. The Atlas just has a really good road presence. It looks and feels like it's designed to be on the road. I would never think about taking this on a trail or taking it off-road. Sure, to the beach, I get it. But on a trail, really? Not really. Wrong car for that. Let's jump to the Subaru. All right, so now I'm in the Subaru, and I definitely feel like I'm in a car. It's definitely lower, and I'm sitting not on top of the car, I'm sitting sort of at the same level as the car, whereas in the Atlas I felt I was sitting higher to try to brace myself around this big monstrosity. But suspension is definitely softer, as I mentioned. It's definitely softer and lighter, and it's more tossable. I think the tossability of this is there at lower speeds, and I mentioned at higher speeds, it just feels a little uncertain for some weird reason or another. And when I was talking about seats, the seats definitely feel a little bit softer, but they're a lot creakier. Like when I'm moving in this, like everything is creaking and cracking. It's like this layer of material that's underneath the actual fabric is creaking and cracking. We get a lot of comments out there of people saying, well, we get cars and all you do is knock it. But that's not my job. My job is to really show you how I would feel or the things that would irritate me or bother me over having the car over a long period of time. Not just, you know, saying everything is amazing, because if you wanted something like that, well, hey, watch something else. All right, so we'll get on the throttle here in the Subaru. On the throttle. This does have simulated CVT gears, so it is shifting gears, but really, it's not really shifting anything. And it's pretty good. I mean, there's definitely no lack of power in this Subaru. It definitely does go, it is smooth. And I shut off that lane keep thing so that way I feel more stable, but it's still, steering wheel is shaky. I don't know if you can see my hands or not, but my hands are doing this and I'm still plowing straight. So I'm gonna go make a left here on the throttle and watch my hands. Like, I'm going like this, but I'm still really going straight. And that is poor in my opinion. I mean, this should not, like, look at my hands. I'm still going straight. I'm doing just under 100 miles an hour now. And yeah, that part to me is something that I would change. The steering component, everything I'm okay with, but that portion of it at higher speed is something that really needs to be addressed. Now, I know I hammered on visibility already, but I will say this has great visibility. This is a huge rear view mirror, and you can see everything in the back. You can see the whole back window. I just find it entertaining that they have paddle shifters and they actually have a manual mode on a CVT, yet in the Volkswagen they don't have paddle shifters and they have a sport mode. So it's just really funny, the dynamics of what they're trying to recreate in each brand and the marketing behind that. It's just really funny to me. Paddle shifters on a CVT and non-paddle shifters on a big SUV that has a sport mode, kind of confusing. Well, they're not really exact fair comparisons because you can only get a 4-cylinder in the Subaru. You can't get it in a 6-cylinder. Whereas in this specific Atlas, this is a 6-cylinder because this is an execuline. So how does it stack up in terms of performance and speed? Well, on paper, the Subaru actually makes a little bit more torque, a little less horsepower, but a little bit more torque because it's turbocharged. But on day-to-day driving, I'd always want to be in a 6-cylinder. Just for me, it feels more linear for something so big. And that probably, as I mentioned in the introduction, hurts Subaru sales. Now in this specific execuline Atlas, this does have a two-tone seat. Now you can see that it's black with sort of a gray contour that wraps around into the door panels as well. But the seat on the Subaru just seems to form a little bit better than the Atlas for some weird reason. This has a wider platform of where I'm sitting. It feels like I can move in the seat. It seems like the seat's built for sort of a wider frame than my little bony bum. But let's see how this goes around corners compared to the Subaru. Everything's rolling. And it feels pretty firm and flat and sort of what I expect. Now in closing, there's a lot to like about the Subaru, but one of the biggest features I didn't talk about, and I want to wait right to the end to talk about it, is resale. Subarus have one of the highest resale values in the space. And that is something to keep in mind because somebody that buys something like this generally just wants something that's practical, reliable, not too fancy. They don't want a lot of things to break. Yeah, they obviously had some major transmission issues with the Ascent when it first came out, but they've cleared that. So now it's really about you. What kind of driver are you? Where do you drive it? How do you drive it? What are you looking for in a car? What are important to you? Those type of features, those type of things are important to know. So the question for you is, will this work for you? Are you looking for something that's more of a trail-rated vehicle, or are you looking for something that's on the road? And that obviously has been explained in this video. So if you like this video, as always, don't forget to comment below. Good or bad, always glad to hear it. Thanks for watching.